What's going on, everybody? So I'm taking a look here at the questions, and I'm going to do the Q&A right now, so we can just get started. Now, I noticed that the first one says, not really a question, but I'd like to hear about your hunting and your fishing stories. That's a great question, but that would take a very long time for me to actually get into. Maybe I can make a separate video on that, but trying to get through 50-some questions, I don't really think I have time to get into those. So, great question. I do have lots of stories, and I'll definitely be telling you some of them. It'd be fun if I could actually get some of the guys that I go on these expeditions with to maybe come in and we can maybe do a round table. I think you'd probably enjoy it. So pause on that one, and we'll head to the next question here. So if Red Dead Redemption didn't exist, what do you think you would be doing right now? All right, well, I can't really play Red Dead right now, as you know, but I do love the game, and if I wasn't making videos on that, I'd probably be making videos sort of more in line with some of my interests. And as you know, I'm very interested in history. I do that for a living, but I'm also interested in historical masculinity and sort of what that means, and also seeing the direction that things are often headed in today's society, and the farther and farther we sort of get away from historical masculinity. I'm not talking about like machoism or anything like that, but the idea of sort of what it means to be a man historically. And that's something that always interests me. It's something that I think is very important nowadays to sort of discuss and have an idea of sort of the direction things are headed. So I'd probably be making videos sort of tying in history of masculinity, comparing it to today, and sort of what avenues there are to sort of continue the the process of ushering men into honorable manhood. So let's go to the next one here. So any historically accurate features you would like to see in Red Dead Online? Absolutely. I made a whole video on this. I should probably make a second video because I keep coming up with stuff. And usually every time I end up reviewing a new role, I tend to come up with new ideas. So I think there's a lot that can be added, and I'm sure you guys agree. But specifically, I'd like to see things like a trapper role. I'd like to see a mining role as well, and a lawman role. But there's a lot of other things they could add, and I hope they do. Okay, moving on here. Wyatt Christensen asks, I'm interested in hunting black bear with a crossbow. Do you have any experience with bow hunting? All right, actually a bear was in my trash last night, and and I had to go out and clean it up this morning. So yeah, and there's usually bear right outside this window here from time to time while I'm out here in my man cave. Now, as far as hunting them, okay, so let's talk about the bow hunting real quick. I know I said I'm not going to really tell any hunting stories right now because it's going to take too much time, but I do have to tell you this story because it's absolutely hilarious, and it has to do with bow hunting, in particular crossbow. So my dad was just out here working on the house with me before my surgery, and then he stayed after a few days to help me get some stuff done. Or rather, I watched him get stuff done since I couldn't really do anything. But he was telling me the story about he had with this crossbow, and it's actually pretty hilarious. So he was out hunting for deer with a crossbow back in Iowa, and in Iowa you need a doctor's note. If you have shoulder issues or anything like that, then you can legally hunt with crossbow. So he's out hunting with crossbow because he had the note, and he didn't get anything with it, and he ended up packing it back away and returning back to his house. And that night he realized that it was still cocked, right? It was still pulled back all the way, so the tension was still in the crossbow. And usually with some high-powered crossbows, you can't dry fire it. Okay, that would just explode. And in order to release it, like if you're going to just say, oh, I'll shoot the arrow, well, what do you shoot it at? I mean, that thing is firing so fast, if you shoot it at a tree, the arrow is going to explode. You know, you shoot it in the ground, you're probably never going to find it, and it might explode. So anyway, they make a variety of arrows that you can, or bolts they call them with a crossbow, that you can use to sort of disengage the string and release the tension. But he didn't have any of those arrows. So he decided that night, since he had forgotten to do so and he didn't want to mess up his bow, he goes down to his basement. And this isn't very long ago. He's telling me the story just a couple days ago, and I guess it happened a couple weeks ago. But he didn't want to tell anybody. This wasn't on the Big Game Hunting Chronicles, by the way, but maybe I can have him tell it himself sometime. So he goes down to his basement and he comes up with this brilliant idea that he's going to release the tension by firing it through some foam insulation down in his basement. And so he stacks up about 4 things of foam insulation and he puts them on the ground in his garage, and it's just a concrete floor underneath it. So he takes his crossbow, he aims it down, and he fires it. And he said the arrow just exploded, okay? Absolutely exploded, and just sent pieces of arrow everywhere, of crossbow bolt, absolutely everywhere. And not only that, but when it kind of exploded, it came back up, it knocked his glasses off his face, and it just kind of wiped him with a series of debris all over his face. And it's kind of like if you ever play basketball and you get popped in the nose, and your nose kind of stings and your face goes a little numb. He said it's like that. It's like that. And so he ends up sort of cleaning up the mess, and he checks himself, and he thinks, oh my God, I'm so close that, I'm so glad I didn't hit my eye. I probably would have blinded myself. And so he's pretty grateful, right? So he's picking up the pieces of the arrow, but he can't find the knock. And the knock is the little thing on the end that clips into the actual string on the bow. And I guess the knock he had on there was a special knock, and it cost a little bit of money, so he was looking everywhere for it. He couldn't find it, and he found everything else, right? So he gave up, he goes upstairs. Well, that night, he's sitting watching TV a few hours later, and it occurs to him that he can't breathe out of one of his nostrils. He takes a flashlight, he goes into the bathroom, and he looks up his nostril, and up in his sinus cavity is a bright orange bow knock, arrow knock, which is stuck up in his head. So he takes his fish pliers and the flashlight, he does a self-operation, he grabs a hold of it, he yanks it out of his nose, and he said blood just starts pouring out of his head, and he just assumed, well, I probably punctured my brain, this will be the end of me. But thank God he recovered and he's fine. So as far as the hunting with the crossbow, I guess that's not so much a short story, but that's the first crossbow story that comes to mind. So I've never hunted with the crossbow. I think it'd be fun to try it, but I'm definitely into shooting bows and hunting with bows and even making bows. So I do have a lot of experience with that. I've made a lot of bows in the past. I started making bows when I was in high school. So this has been probably 25 years, which makes me sound pretty old. I'm almost 40 now, I'm 39. So I've been working on that since I was about a sophomore in high school, freshman or sophomore in high school. I made some bows growing up too, but those weren't really real bows. So I've made some really good ones. I usually use Osage orange, which the French called the beau d'arc, which was just the most fantastic bow making material you could ever get. If you've never seen it, it's we call it hedge as well in some places in the United States, and it's so hard, it's such a dense wood that if you put it in like a wood burning stove, it can melt through the stove. That's how hot it heats up. It's just so condensed and it's so strong. And it's little wonder then that you can make fantastic bows out of it. It's just it grows really gnarly. It's got a lot of twists and things. But I have my bows. I'd be happy to show them if anybody wants to see them and kind of talk about that process. It's a really fun thing to do. There's a lot of, it's funny, there's a lot of science that goes into it, but there's also a lot of tradition that goes into it. And it's kind of hard to explain. It's sort of, there are certain rules, if you will, about cutting the tree you cut down, for instance, to make the bow. The best time to cut it is when the moon is in a certain phase, and you want to cut it during certain months of the year. And there is science, of course, to that as well. But there's things that seemingly don't make sense with it. So like if you make a bow and the bottom of the tree and the top of the tree ends up becoming the bottom and the top of the bow, which is how you're supposed to do it, the bow shoots straight. But if you make a bow and you reverse it, so if you make the bow and you cut down the tree and you've got the trunk, right? And then you turn the trunk upside down and then you make this the top of the bow and the bottom of the bow will never shoot straight. It'll end up being a pretty crappy bow. And I'm not sure why that is, but there's a lot of interesting Native American wisdom on that. And you can find that information in a variety of sources. There's a great series of books called the Bowyer Bibles, and I think that's like a 4-part book series. And then there's one by, I think it's James Easter, who wrote Making the Cherokee Bow. And that's kind of how I got started in high school, is I found this guy James Easter, and the internet sort of existed at the time, and I found this crude website, and I don't know if he's ever updated it, but he was the first person I'd ever seen who you could buy a DVD on how to sort of make these bows. And so I watched his DVD, and he had some really useful tools as well. And so all that stuff came in handy. Anyway, this is a very long answer to a very short question. So hopefully you guys got something out of it. But if you want to know more about any of that, or you have any more questions on it, just go ahead and write down in the comments. Okay, where are we at here? Crocodini asks, who was your favorite story character from Red Dead? Not a big character, but Amish. I just like the guy. I like that he lives in the woods. I think it's cool that he's got one leg and he's still doing his thing. Yeah. Now, if you're asking from Red Dead Online as well, Amish. Same thing. Same thing. Yeah, I love the guy. I just go and do missions with him just to hang out. All right, Plague Dr. Morpheus. With the current selection of guns in the game, which the guns would you like to have in real life? Oh, man. That's an awesome question. All of them, I guess. But specifically, I've actually been looking at recently purchasing, I want to purchase a Browning Auto 5. I think that'd be a really fun one to have. Obviously, an elephant gun would be great, but any of the old Winchesters are fantastic. The Henry rifle is great. Also, am very partial to the Colt Navy revolver. But yeah, I guess I wouldn't obviously plan on using too many of these guns for hunting purposes or anything, but I do hang a lot of historical antique rifles and things like that up, and you can't see it, but there's some hanging up right here. So yeah, so if I had to pick one, of the guns, I suppose the elephant rifle, just because it's, you know, back then those were just beautiful guns, and there's an amazing history with those elephant rifles. So I suppose that I'd probably have to have that, or like an old Winchester, like an 1894 or something like that. Good question. Okay, nothing, Eric says, nothing to do with Red Dead, but do you own or carry a gun? Absolutely. I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment, and I own numerous guns, and I want to purchase many more, and I have a lot of antique guns even hanging up. So I kind of got into this because my dad obviously is very into this, but what's interesting is, at least in my understanding, is his interest, of course, came from his father as well. But his father sort of took it to a different level, and he got into it in a very interesting way. So during the Great Depression, when people couldn't pay to have work done, my grandpa was a carpenter, and he also installed flooring of all sorts, and he fixed, you know, boilers and all that stuff. He was just a very, very handy guy. And when people couldn't pay to get the work done that they needed to have done, my grandpa would do work in exchange for firearms. And he ended up accumulating hundreds of antique firearms, and modern, you know, at the time. So this would have been obviously a very long time ago, but what would have been more modern guns at that time, but a lot of old antique guns, a lot from the 17 and 1800s. My dad always tells a story that he and his folks would go to church, then after church they'd go out into the farm, out to the field, and they would just shoot guns. And it was just something that they did. And it wasn't any sort of like macho, you know, sort of ridiculous thing. It was more along the lines of it was a skill. It was a tool, something you needed to respect, something you needed to appreciate, something that could be very useful, and also very dangerous. But, you know, same thing with fire, right? It could be dangerous, but it's also very useful. So, yeah, he got very into guns then from my grandpa having this arsenal collection. My grandpa also built a firing range in the basement of his house back in Iowa. And they would go down there and they would shoot guns. There's a story one time of them running out of gunpowder and not wanting to open up another keg, which should tell you a lot about my family, that they're shooting black powder rifles in their basement. Anyway, and they've got kegs of gunpowder. Nothing weird about that. This is a while back. This is like in the 80s. So anyway, my dad and my grandpa ran out of gunpowder, and they didn't want to tap another keg to do it, to get in there. So what they ended up doing was my grandpa ended up taking apart an M80, and he poured it down black powder rifle, and as he was tapping it, it ignited, and the ramrod shot out of the gun, and it went, luckily, right by his head. It went right by his head and went straight upstairs, and my beloved grandmother was on the toilet, and it came directly up, stuck straight out of the ground, and it was just a few inches from her face, directly in front of the toilet. So, yeah. Mute Guy asks, when did you start playing Red Dead Redemption? I started playing right when it came out. We're currently in the renovation at the time when it came out. We're renovating our house, which is this cabin that my wife and I bought up in the mountains here. And during the course of that, Red Dead came out pretty much at the worst time. So I would do sort of renovation work on the house during the day, and then I'd hop on for a little bit at night. So, yeah, so I started playing right when Red Dead Redemption online, when RDO came out. And I've been sort of playing on and off ever since. Okay, Luca Kim asks, what would you say are your favorite historical periods to learn about? It's a really good question, Luca. I have a lot. Now, in grad school, my focus was on, so technically my focus is on medieval Scotland and its interactions with England and France, particularly around the 100 Years' War. I lecture about that at my work, of course, but I'm primarily a world historian at work, so I teach a lot of the world civilization classes. But as far as what I'm most interested in, sort of my favorite periods, I do love medieval Scotland and English history. I think it's fascinating. I also really love colonial American history. I love the American West as well. So yeah, so those are some of my favorite. I also am really interested in the fur trade. Historically, I find that extremely fascinating, and I just enjoy reading books about all of it. So yeah, so I'd say all those are my favorite historical periods to learn about. And I think there's something interesting in all history. And it's funny because as soon as I'll hear some random thing about some aspect of history somewhere in the world, and I'll get fascinated and I'll read a book about it, and it just kind of adds sort of to the depth of historical knowledge and the breadth of historical knowledge. And I think the more historical knowledge we have, definitely the better. I always thought of history as sort of like a puzzle on a table, and how we get these puzzle pieces as we go through sort of high school history, and in college, if you take some history, you get a little bit more. But the more puzzle pieces you have, the more you can begin putting things together, and you start being able to sort of zoom out and actually getting an idea of the bigger picture, right? It's not just putting this piece to this piece and connecting them. It's what does the actual image say? And I think that's what's interesting about history is the more you dive deep into it, the clearer picture you get of how everything interconnects and sort of what that greater story actually is. And history is a very complicated thing. It's an unbelievably complicated issue or subject, and you just have to learn, right? You just have to dive in. You have to read. I mean, this isn't posed or anything. I keep a stack of books around me at all times, and I'm usually just reading something. And these come into varieties. Civil War, which, by the way, I love the Civil War, which sounds a bit morbid, but you know what I mean if you're a Civil War buff. I've got books on sort of historical sort of looks at liberty. I've got some great Nathaniel Philbrick books, particularly The Last Stand, Fur Fortune and Empire. That's a great book about the fur trade. So yeah, what are my favorite periods? Oh, I guess I got a little off track there. So those are my favorite periods, but I like all aspects of history, but in particular, it would be those. So it's a lot of colonial history, American West history, and definitely medieval European history. I find all those very fascinating. Okay, Dorian Finney-Smith says, hope you get better soon, man. My question would be, thank you, by the way. My question would be, why did you decide to make history videos on Red Dead in particular instead of other games? That's a really good question, Dorian. I just like Red Dead a lot. I think that's basically it. I just really enjoy the setting of the game. I really enjoy playing the game. It's a very peaceful game for me to play, for the most part, depending on where you are. But if you're up in sort of Big Valley or you're up in the Grizzlies, maybe it's not the same experience for all of you, but I find it pretty peaceful to sort of ride around on my horse and to hunt. So I have a good time with it. So yeah, so I just started making them because I enjoy the game and I enjoy the period, and when new games come out that pique my interest, I'll be making videos on those, or maybe I'll be making videos on other things as well. Just kind of see sort of where things lead. But yeah, that's why I started making Red Dead videos instead of other games. I tend to get focused too on one thing at a time, and that's kind of how I operate. And I guess I just had more to say, and I'm not quite done saying everything I want to say about Red Dead historically. So, good question. Okay, Anthony says, what are some good history books that you recommend? Okay, well, great question too. If you're looking for like historical knowledge, just entertainment, there's a lot of different avenues you can take. Personally, I'm a big fan of a handful of authors. David McCullough is fantastic. Nathaniel Philbrick, he's really good. You should read In the Heart of the Sea. The Last Stand is a really good one by him as well. He also did The Mayflower, Sea of Glory, and I think he wrote Valiant Ambition as well about Benedict Arnold. So he's one of definitely my favorite authors. My other one is Candace Millard, and she's great too. You should start if you are interested in any of these. I would say maybe start with Candace Millard's, what's it called? Fate of the Empire, I think is what it is. Fate of the Empire? Might be. Oh no, Destiny of the Republic. There we go. Sorry. Destiny of the Republic. Start with that if you can. It's about James Garfield and his assassination and sort of the delayed death that happened with him. It's fascinating. I got confused because she also wrote Hero of the Empire, which is about Winston Churchill. And she wrote River of Doubt about Teddy Roosevelt, who is my favorite president of all time and one of my favorite people of all time. So, yeah, I would say look into Candace Millard, Nathaniel Philbrick, and David McCullough. And for McCullough, he's got a bunch, like Mornings on Horseback, and the Johnstown Flood is really good, too. And he actually just put out The Pioneers not terribly long ago, which is pretty good, too. Okay, how and when... Fire Rocket asks, how and when did the Wild West era start? Yeah, there's no sort of one thing. It's not like somebody fired a gun and everybody went running. But the peak was definitely in sort of the 1870s and 1880s. And when I say the peak, I'm talking about the idea of the Wild West when we think of sort of the gunfights and the cowboys and just sort of all that. But you could go back to the Mountain Men, and you could make a plausible argument that's the Wild West as well. It's definitely the West. I'm not sure how you categorize the wild part, but it was dangerous, and those guys were absolutely awesome. Yeah, but I would say it's easier to say it kind of ends in the 1890s. So Rockstar was pretty spot on with that part. That would be my answer to you, is that there's not necessarily a starting date, but I see somebody on here in the comments wrote 1840 to 90s. Yeah, I think that's good enough answer, I think, to me, for me. So somewhere around then. It definitely picked up, though, after the Civil War. So after 1865, it really, the wild part really kicks in when you have a lot of Southerners moving west, amongst others. So, and the California Gold Rush, right, in 47. I think Johann Sutter discovered it in his mill in 47, and then news gets out in 48, and then everybody rushes in 49. So, yeah, it all falls into that time frame, right, like 1840s to like 1890s. Okay, Adam asks, what is the most important concept in history? Well, geez, Adam, this is a complicated question that could be a whole series of videos. I think the one you most often hear is that those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it, right? And I think that's pretty true. I would argue that, for me, the most important concept in history is probably the dangers of collective guilt. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times in history, you have governments or groups that try to push an agenda that sort of changes the individual into the group, right? So you lose individual identity and you end up sort of being categorized under group identity. And so if the group is collectively charged with a crime, regardless of your individual innocence, you're guilty as well. And I bring that up because you see this played out, not just obviously in things like the Holocaust, right? Where you have 6 million Jews, gypsies, leftist politicians, homosexuals, political prisoners, you name it, being killed. But most people don't realize sort of that, you know, that's not at all the worst sort of incidents of things like collective guilt. You have like the kulaks being killed off in Russia. I mean, in Russia you have somewhere between about 20 to 40 million people being killed. And you have the same thing going on in China during the Great Leap Forward. And you have, you know, conservatively about 60 million and as high as 100 million people being killed. And again, a lot of this falls under everything from collective guilt, which ties into identity politics and things like that. If you haven't listened to Jordan Peterson, he talks a lot about this, and I would definitely recommend you check out some of those videos. So I think, yeah, that's the danger. And when you look at things like the French Revolution, for instance, it's hard not to see things like that being played out over and over again in history, where people get fired up about something and you start losing sight of people as individuals, and you see them belonging to groups, and then you sort of take out that anger, that frustration against a group rather than the actual people responsible. So there you have it. Okay. All right, next up, Lil Garfield says, what is your favorite town in Red Dead Online and why? Definitely Strawberry. Why is it my favorite town? Because I spend most of my time up in Big Valley hunting up there, and that's sort of my go-to town when I come back into town for supplies. Now, I've seen a couple videos saying that historically Strawberry is, you know, this town in California or this other town, which may be the case. I've actually never looked into it, but Strawberry also reminds me a whole lot and looks a whole lot like the town I live just outside, which is Evergreen, Colorado. I dig the town. I think it's pretty cool. Evergreen is sort of a little resort place, much like Strawberry. So yeah, I would say Strawberry is my favorite town. I like the architecture. I like that a lot of people aren't around, so I can just kind of get in and get out and not be bothered too much. So there you have it. Okay. All right. Gordon the Dragon asks, see, I love the YouTube channel, love the channel, and hope you get well soon. There, I can't even talk. Yeah, thank you, Gordon. I appreciate that. I'm actually curious what made you decide to start creating content on YouTube. Okay, I love video games, always have. I got a Nintendo, I think, in 1985, came with Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, which is a great game, still is a great game. And I've just always kind of had video games as part of my life ever since then. I've incorporated video games into my teaching, and I actually do a lot of gaming as part of my teaching when we're not in COVID, of course. The gaming, though, it's IGBL, it's immersive game-based learning, and I create a lot of gaming scenarios and things like that. Basically, think of a combination of like role-playing informed through primary sources with sort of strategic board game elements. So it's not video gaming, but there's a lot of strategy and debate and things like that involved in it, and it's a pretty cool approach. And the assessment data on it shows that it actually works really well in the classroom to teach people history. So anyway, so I do love the gaming aspect of it, and I try to tie that stuff in at work. So I think it's only natural that I'd be talking about games on YouTube as well, particularly games that I really enjoy, and linking them to history. The other part of the reason why I'm making it is that I just like creating options in life. And I think that having a YouTube channel, this is something I want to pursue farther, sort of in the longer term. I like the ability to do that. And, you know, I think it's smart to at least get something off the ground in that regard. The reason for that is, of course, higher education has become a bit politicized, to put it nicely. And I'm not a big fan of that. I think that in a lot of ways, and it's not just, I'm not saying it's just my school or anything like that. I'm very grateful for the job that I have. I'm very grateful for my students, my colleagues and things. But I think just across the nation in general, you see a shift away from critical thinking in more so to like customer service, if you will. And I think the most important thing is to bring in different perspectives and ideological diversity into the classroom. And a lot of times, though, if those clash with, say, certain political aims, you're not usually allowed to voice those concerns in the same way. Or if you do voice those concerns, sometimes you kind of get brushed aside. So anyway, higher ed's it's a changing landscape. We'll just put it that way. And again, while I do love what I do and I appreciate what I do and I love my students, there's definitely a lot of politics that have sort of gotten into it. And I think it does detract in a lot of ways from the real purpose of higher ed. So in the long run, we'll see what that means for me. But in the meantime, I like making these videos. I like having an alternative sort of job, if you will, at least part-time job. And we'll see what happens long term with building up the channel. And maybe someday it can even replace what I'm doing, and I can kind of move into that. So we'll see. All right, De La Bousse, what's your favorite role in Red Dead Online? This one's really easy. The trader role, absolutely. It's the closest thing to sort of a hunting role, or at least it was up until we started sedating animals or whatever it is that we do with Harriet. But yeah, definitely the trader role. I wish they had sort of trapping as part of that role and cabin building and all that stuff, but we'll see what happens in the long term. But without a doubt, trader. European Patriot, always on here, always chatting. European Patriot, good to see you. What's your dog's name? My dog's name is Elka, and she's a miniature schnauzer. We just never clipped her ears or anything like that, so she doesn't look like a schnauzer all that much, and we cut her hair a little different, I guess, but yeah, she's awesome. She's like my daughter. I love her. All right, Jason A says, if you had to live in one of the towns in Red Dead Redemption 2, which one would you choose and why? Again, Strawberry. But first of all, I wouldn't want to live in one of the towns. But that's not your question, right? I'm not really a town person. I don't live in a town now. I like having my space. And in the game, though, if I had to choose, yeah, I'd choose Strawberry. I like it. It's the closest thing to where I live now. And it's usually not too busy. People tend to sort of leave you alone there. So I do appreciate that. All right, Pete Capri said, what inspired you to start making videos and why Red Dead Redemption in particular? I kind of touched on this in some of these earlier questions, but look, I love the game. I love the setting. I think it's a fun time. It's also a very relaxing game if you play it in a particular way. And also, like making these videos because it's a good break from work, and it's nice to, I think, as I said kind of before, I think you have politics getting injected into almost everything, and it's nice to be doing something here where I don't have to inject politics, and I don't have pressure to inject it or anything like that. So it's nice to just kind of take a step back and be normal. Just be normal and talk about stuff that you're interested in without fear of anybody being offended. So yeah, that's why. All right, Harry W.J. He says, if it was 1899, what job would you have? Not Red Dead Online. That's a really good question, Harry. Well, historically, if it was 1899, statistically, I'd be most likely to be in agricultural work of some sort, probably a farmer. Second, I would be working in industry, so working in factories or something like that. But that's not what you're asking. You're not asking historically what jobs did people have. So if it was me, what would I do? In 1899, probably, if I wasn't married, okay, because I'm not sure how my wife would take it, but if I wasn't married in 1899, I would probably head up to Alaska. And even though I'd catch the tail end of the Klondike Gold Rush, there's a lot of gold coming out of there. And I love Alaska. I love the idea of that adventure. So I'd probably be a miner for a little bit by going up there. And then returning back to the States. And I say the States because it's not just Alaska, right? The Klondike was actually in sort of northwest Canada. But anyway, I'd return back to the United States, and I don't know, I'd probably be teaching at a college, probably teaching history, or writing would probably be my other one. So, cool question. I like that, Harry. Thank you. All right, Lemon Mouse 77 said, this is the last question here. What's your favorite video game other than Red Dead Online, Red Dead Redemption 2? I play a lot of games. I've been playing a lot of Crusader Kings 3 recently. I have a good time with that game. I like the second one a lot too. I play Wolfpack, which is a German submarine game in World War II, it's more of a simulation that requires me to have a calculator and a notebook out to calculate torpedo trajectories. It sounds ridiculous, but it's actually really, really fun. And I actually was thinking about doing a video on it. So if you guys aren't familiar, I think it's in alpha phase right now or something, but it's a great game. It's really fun. So Wolfpack is good. But as far as just like his sort of like what other games are my favorite games, I love Ultimate General Civil War. That's a fantastic game. I love playing it. But my favorite game of all time is this old game that was on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, and it's called Liberty or Death. And it was made by this company, I think it's called Koei, something like that. And that game, I started playing it when I was, oh man, I don't know, it would have been like the early 90s, but I was super young. But it was a game on the Revolutionary War, and it had over 500 historical officers in the game, along with all their attributes, and it had all the counties and things in the eastern U.S. And you'd meet as Parliament or as a Continental Congress, and it was, look, it's a laughable game today if you look at it. It looks ridiculous because it's got like, what would it be, 16-bit graphics, but it's just a fun game. It's a brilliant game, and honestly, it probably had a lot to do with me becoming a history professor. I don't think I would have. Well, maybe I would have gone into it. Who really knows? I was always reading history books regardless, but it was a game that it had a tremendous impact on me and sort of what I wanted to do with my life. And since I couldn't go back in time and sort of be part of those events, reading about it, talking about it constantly, it just made sense that it's something that I should then do for a living, right? Is sort of learn about these things and discuss them with people, talk about them with people, and sort of share my interest and appreciation with them, and maybe make sense of it all as well. But yeah, that's the game. I absolutely love that game, Liberty or Death. You got to check it out. Unfortunately, it's not even available on like Steam. Like nobody ever remade it. But yeah, it's such a good game, such a good game. So anyway. That's all the questions. Hopefully you folks enjoyed these answers. If you have any further questions or anything you want clarification on, let me know. If you want to know more about some of the stuff I talked about or more of my opinions on this stuff, I'm happy to share it. But anyway, thank you all for your well-wishing. I definitely hope to sort of bounce back very quickly and be making some more videos. So you folks enjoy the remainder of your short weekend. I think it's Sunday today. You can tell I'm paying very close attention to that. And just have a great next week. Okay, thank you, folks.